Hi, and for a while now, each week I've done a weekly news update on anything at all to do with Warcraft. But at the end of 2016, I thought I would do my top 5 rundown of the biggest stories that have hit the world of Warcraft in the last year. In number 5, we had a new game director quite recently for World of Warcraft. For a very, very long time, it was a man called Tom Chilton, also known as Calgan. He has been a senior game developer right from the start of World of Warcraft, very instrumental in implementing a lot of features within the game. However, didn't always have the best relationship with the player base itself. He's one of those guys where you sort of have to credit him for bringing a lot of really great things into the game. And of course, anyone who was in the World of Warcraft project from the start obviously deserves plaudits. But he was one of those people who sort of regarded the player base or customers as a bit of an annoyance, in the same way that sometimes you get teachers who are a bit annoyed at students or doctors who are a bit annoyed at patients. It's a bit like, yeah, okay. Without them, you don't have this awesome job that pays pretty well. But anyway, he has moved on, not from the company, but to another part of the company, away from World of Warcraft very recently, and promoted into his place is Ian Hazzakostas, otherwise known as Watcher, who also, I suppose it could be argued, had a bit of a shaky start on the old PR move. He disenchanted a few players with his "you think you want it but you don't" statement, and then sticking to the guns very, very strongly for all of 48 hours when he wanted to announce that there was not going to be any flying anymore in World of Warcraft. However, to be fair, it looks like he has developed very well into the role of initially assistant game director, and I have to say there's been a lot of really positive movement, especially on the feedback area, since he's been promoted to game director. So we can look forward to 2017 and really see him put his mark on the game's development from now on. In number 4, there's a news story that is blindingly obvious, but it's a very, very large news story and so needs to be covered in here. And it is that World of Warcraft got a new expansion, Legion, of course. And this is a big news story. If any expansion was going to be released, you would have to put it down as one of the big 5 news stories of World of Warcraft in any year. But this year in particular, after a number of expansions where World of Warcraft had slowly declined in strength, and let's be clear here, even if the number of players was to halve tomorrow, it would still put it way above many other titles that have been running for a while and still churn out regular content. However, from its lofty position, it has come down quite some since Wrath of the Lich King. And there's all sorts of discussions you can have about why. You can talk about, how they misplaced their resource time in Cataclysm on a load of stuff we didn't need. MOP, I was very positive about MOP, but again, MOP continued to lose numbers. And there are, reasons that you can point to on this one as well. Warlords of Draenor, the least said, the better. Warlords of Draenor had no effective new content since the day it was launched. So although it technically had 2 content patches, they were not really what other people would call content. So they had to really pull their finger out of Legion. Now, a lot of blame was directed at developers for the travails of the game in the last few years. I think it's largely unfair because ultimately this came about, and Blizzard have said themselves, this came about from trying to get this expansion a year nonsense out, and they've now abandoned that notion. You can't do it with the way World of Warcraft works in terms of a quality product. So what they've done instead is they did intend to bring out more for Warlords of Draenor, but they said, no, we're going to cut our losses there. It's already a disaster. All we're trying to do here is polish a turd. Forget it. Focus all our energies onto Legion and make sure that Legion starts with a bang and continues. And that is what they've done so far, of course. It was we were allowed to know unofficially that it sold as much as Warlords of Draenor, at least at launch, at the launch point. And of course, they've made it very clear they're going to keep bringing out content to the point where you actually feel where some content is coming out a little too quickly for some, not necessarily everyone. In number 3 is a controversial subject, and it is related to private servers. The famous Nostalria server, which of course is not the only private server, but certainly is the one that has made the most noise, earlier this year closed down. Now, there are a number of misconceptions around this. The prevailing story is that Blizzard shut it down, which of course is not true. Blizzard cannot, of course, allow it to stay up, and they will take legal action when someone jumps up and down. But ultimately what has happened is Nostalria's closed down. There was a large petition of dubious nature that got Blizzard to invite the people at Nostalrius to discuss legacy servers at Blizzard HQ with Mike Morhaime himself, who is the CEO of Blizzard. Very senior people were talking to them. They weren't just being passed off as such. Now, I said at the time this was largely a PR exercise just to smooth it over and that not a lot would be done. Nostalrius people came out saying they'd had very positive discussions because from their point of view, Blizzard was saying, well, there's a lot of technical issues here, and Nostalrius was saying, no, we've solved them all, here you go. Of course, it's not the technical issues really that's stopping Blizzard doing this. There are plenty of ways they could do this without distracting from the main team. As I've said myself, you could just put a small team that's got nothing to do with the live version of World of Warcraft, so it's not distracting for anyone, in charge of it, and that would solve the problem. But for whatever reason, they don't want to do it. It's their game. They can do what they like. Then what happened is a great deal of nothing, unsurprising to me. And then before BlizzCon, Nostalrius really wanted Blizzard to say something about it, so they decided to force their hand by saying that if Blizzard don't say anything, they're going to come out with a major announcement after BlizzCon. So Blizzard did respond, not at BlizzCon. They were quite clear they weren't going to say anything about it at BlizzCon. They responded beforehand by saying, we're not doing it. Which, as I say, was a surprise to quite a lot of people for some reason, but not at all to me. So Nostalrius came out with their announcement that they were going to throw their weight behind another private server, Elysium, and several people who worked on Nostalrius have gone over there and they've worked on that, and that is, so there's a new private server effectively Nostalrius, Elysium, whatever you want to call it, coming out very, very soon, if not already. I've not kept my finger on the pulse of that one just yet. Which, of course, begs the question really quickly. I don't want to make this too much about this, but again, it comes down to, did they shut down because of financial reasons, as they initially said, by the way? It seems to be the community that said, oh, Blizzard closed them down. Or is it that Blizzard... Obviously, we know Blizzard didn't take legal action because that would be a matter of public record. We'd know about that. But did they threaten it and Nostalrius believe the threat and therefore just shut down because of that? If it's the latter, then they're not going to very noisily work on another server because Blizzard would just do exactly the same thing. So that brings me to the conclusion that it was, as they originally said, financial issues, that they couldn't make the finances work. Someone else has got a different model, the way their finances appear to be more secure, so they've thrown their weight behind that instead. And that, I think, is where the story is going to end there. It's one of those things. I don't think Blizzard, and I've said this before, are all that bothered about private servers. They just mustn't publicly be seen to be allowing them. So it would actually, private servers would do themselves much more favours by not being so confrontational, because, you know, if you force Blizzard's hands, they have to defend their copyright. And it's just, you know, and Blizzard can't, they don't really want to go to the expense of that. They don't see these people as potential customers. I mean, we can disagree on that, but if Blizzard saw the people that play on these private servers as potential customers, I have no doubt they would just put a little team on it and do it themselves. But I don't. I just don't think they see it that way. So why would they bother to close down these private servers and go to the expense of that, other than just, as I say, to protect their copyright? But that's story number 3. Story number 2, we had, after a very long wait, a Warcraft film come out. Now, this Warcraft film, of course, doesn't follow the exact same story of the invasion of Azeroth by the Orcs, but it does, in my opinion, a pretty good job. I've watched this film a lot of times, got it on Blu-ray, keep watching it every now and then. I love it. I think it's a great film. It's not necessarily the film I would have done. It's not necessarily the film a lot of people would have done. They sort of, and unfortunately, they sort of caught themselves in a little bit of a trap, which is unfortunate. Now, the film itself did okay in Europe. It didn't light it on fire, but it did all right. It did very badly in North America, but it did stunningly well in China. Now, in China, of course, there's there's two sides to this. First of all, China tried to protect their own cultural cinema industry, so they don't allow many imports. So they limit the number of sort of Hollywood-type films or Western films to so many a year to show. So it doesn't have as much competition. So you can say from that point of view. At the same time, Warcraft has become the most popular cinema film in China, so it has beaten even the Western films that get to show there as well. So it has been genuinely loved in China, to the point where it has made enough money to make a sequel all but inevitable now. But I was putting my thoughts to why wasn't it so popular in North America? And there may have been a bit of a clue in a Cinema Sins I was watching. If anyone doesn't know what this is, on YouTube there's a Cinema Sins is like it's a tongue-in-cheek critique of films, of particularly like blockbuster films. And usually, you can sort of tell that the people who do these actually watch the films and they enjoyed the films and would probably rewatch them. But, it's just like poking plot holes and things like that. And it's a bit of fun. The one they did for Warcraft was actually quite vitriolic. It was genuinely vitriolic. The people here, the person doing it made no bones about the fact that they disliked this film intensely and wanted it to be over. There was no comedy value to the so-called review they did, the Cinema Sins. In fact, it got quite hilarious for me at one point where they were picking a plot hole that actually wasn't there, and they even showed the clip that explained what it was they didn't understand. And any sort of objective person will be looking at this and going, what? They've just explained what you said you don't get. Huh? But so then I thought, well, what is this about? And is this indicative of the reason why it didn't go so well in North America? And I think a lot of it is down to people who don't come from a sort of fantasy gaming background, who don't get the fantasy gaming. Now that I think about it, probably were not going to be all that enamoured of this film. And the reason is, and they said it in the Cinema Sins, orcs are Tolkien. Yes, Tolkien came up with orcs. And I think anyone who comes from a gaming background understands a few things. First of all, when people come up with a new gaming system, a company comes up with a new game, they're focusing on making the game good. And they usually pin their lore, their storylines, on something that's familiar. Now, by far the biggest fantasy gaming industry has been Dungeons and Dragons. And Dungeons and Dragons did the same thing, and they anchored their world initially very much on Tolkien stuff, and then they developed it themselves, but nonetheless they had things like orcs and so on. So everyone has sort of pinned their stuff to Tolkien, who already had such a rich world developed. It made sense to do that. And gaming systems such as Warcraft and such as Warhammer and things like that have sort of followed the lead from Dungeons and Dragons, I feel anyway, and used familiar themes such as orcs. But when you, I suppose, don't come from that background, don't understand that, you probably just see it as a Tolkien ripoff that's not very good. And I think that's maybe what people saw in that. And then, of course, on the other side of it, you've got the people who do understand it and played the game and loved World of Warcraft and watched the film, and it wasn't what they want, because they perhaps wanted, perhaps I'm a World of Warcraft player myself, wanted a copy of what the storyline should be, even though Blizzard changed that every couple of years. So maybe they were sort of caught between a rock and a hard place, really. Can't please the people who don't get the game at all. Can't please the people who do. But in actual fact, enough people were pleased by it, and I was as well, that, yeah, a sequel's coming. I don't know when. It hasn't even been announced yet. So it'll be a few years off at least. And number one story, the big earth shaker of a story this year, has been the fall of a titan. Chris Metzen has retired from Blizzard. Chris Metzen has been so instrumental in the development of World of Warcraft and every part of it that there was a time when I actually thought he was one of the founding members of Blizzard. I didn't actually understand until later that he was an employee. He joined after the company was formed, not long after, and in time for Warcraft, which is the first contact I had with the company. But he was Mr. Warcraft for me. This guy, and I haven't always agreed with everything he's sort of said or directed about the game, by the way. But I think where you can draw a parallel between Metzen and Chilton is Metzen had a very good relationship with the player base and was very genuine. All right, you didn't get the feeling that he was being disingenuous ever. So you respected the fact that he was doing what he did with the player base in mind. And whether you agree, because you get any two intelligent people to talk at length about anything, and at some point they will disagree. So you're okay with disagreeing with some of the things Chris Metzen did, because the vast majority of the work he did is the reason why you play the game. And it was a huge shock. It was a massive shock. And he gave an interview later on where sort of, because I at the time, it was such a shock. I was worried about things like, is he ill? Has there been some internal strife there? What's going on? And no, it was just for very, very genuine reasons. He'd been burnt out by it. I think he loved the game development side of it. And as he got promoted, he ended up being senior vice president. And at that point, it's probably industrial relations. I think he even talked about the fact he was constantly having to put out fires, smooth over arguments between developers and things like that. And of course, he'd be working on all the different games, not just World of Warcraft, the whole range of Blizzard games. And of course, he was very much involved in the failed Project Titan. And listen to this interview, he took that very badly. He didn't, he really did take that badly. And Overwatch, which, they then put their efforts into, was his let's get back on top. And then he decided some time ago he was going to retire, just wanted to see Overwatch out and successful. And at that point he goes, yeah, that's it. Unfortunately, he didn't appear at BlizzCon. He retired before BlizzCon. I thought that was very disappointing, in particular when they were going to do a bit. They did an anniversary panel thing for Blizzard, and he wasn't on that, and that was disappointing. I'm assuming that was Chris Metzen's decision, for which I have to respect, but for me that was disappointing. But yes, this has to be the biggest news story of the year for me, in a year of fairly big news stories, simply because he has been part of World of Warcraft and every part of it since the start, and part of Warcraft, not just World of Warcraft. So much of what this game is wouldn't be were it not for him. So those are my top 5 news stories of the year. Do you agree with the 5 I've chosen? Do you agree with the order of the 5 I've chosen? Comments below as usual, and hope you enjoy your new year. And until next time, I'll see you later.